Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our first morning panel of the festival on our last day, I'm afraid. My name is Natasha Carthew, and I am Artistic Director of Class Fest. I'm really excited for this panel today, and I wanted to chair one panel, and this was the one which was the debut Heyday. I think it's absolutely incredible that we are able to kind of celebrate our writing in this festival, but as debuts and working class debut writers, I think it's the hardest kind of time in your life when you've got a book coming out, you've had a book out, and you have to kind of negotiate that world that you're thrown into a world that you don't know you're in. So I really hope if there's any writers there today that you chat to everyone afterwards. At 11 o'clock, we're going to go outside and sign some books and just chat to the guys here and ask them how they got to where they are in their journey to their first book coming out. So really pleased today to talk to Moses McKenzie, Yvonne Bailey-Smith, Chris Walsh, Jessica Andrews, and Lorraine Brown. And thank you all for coming, especially on a Sunday morning. And also, audience, thank you for coming out. Giving up your Sunday mornings, but this is going to be absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to start off with talking about just basically, I want to kind of talk to these guys about their books, and I really want to hear their books as well. I think debut writers are not given enough time at festivals to talk about their work, and they often have to share it with kind of super-powered writers who kind of push everyone aside. And, you know, as debut writers, you kind of want your moment in the sun, and I want to discuss that as well, whether debut writers, working class writers, are we getting our moment in the sun, or is it still kind of the same shitty deal, I suppose. Okay, so I'm going to read bios first. So I'll start with Lorraine, to my right. Lorraine Brown's varied background spans fashion journalism and acting, giving her a unique take on storytelling. She also worked as a school receptionist whilst writing and taking postgraduate diploma in psychodynamic counselling. She currently delivers counselling sessions alongside writing novels, the manuscript of what became her debut novel, Uncoupling, which includes themes of financial hardship and challenging family circumstances, was longlisted for the Bath Novel Award 2016, and having been chosen to take part in Penguin Random House Right Now programme in 2018, she spent a further year working on the manuscript, which was published in February 2021. She is now a full-time writer, and her second novel will be out in spring 2022. Jessica Andrews. She grew up in Sunderland. She writes for The Guardian, The Independent, BBC Radio 4, Stylish, and Elle magazine, among others. Her debut novel, Saltwater, won the Portico Prize in 2020, and her second novel, Milk Teeth, will be published by Sceptre in July 2022. She co-runs The Grapevine, a magazine which aims to give a platform to underrepresented writers, and co-presents literary podcast Tender Buttons. She lives in Bristol and teaches creative writing at Roehampton University. Chris. Chris Walsh grew up in Middlesbrough and now lives in Kent. His debut novel, The Dig Street Festival, published in April 2021 by Louise Walters Books, which is also a one-woman band working class publisher as well, so she's really pushing boundaries. He was interviewed by Philip Larkin's Society about Larkin's influence on his writing. His work has appeared in Moxy magazine and Ellipsis magazine, among others. He has completed his second book, autofiction, called Book of Jobs. Currently unpublished, which both humorously and poignantly details his employment and dealing with mental health challenges. Book of Jobs was read early on by Kit de Waal, who cited it as one of the inspirations for the Unbound Common People. That's really interesting. You want to talk about common people as well. Yeah. And he is working on his second novel. Yvonne Bailey-Smith, near the end there, was born in Jamaica and came to the UK as a teenager. She trained and worked as a social worker before becoming a psychotherapist, and has worked for the past 25 years, both within the NHS and in private practice. The Day I Fell Off My Island is Yvonne's debut novel. The story, set in Jamaica and London, is a coming-of-age story. Yvonne is the proud mother of 3 children and a grandmother of 4. Yvonne is currently working on a sequel to The Day, as well as on a book of short stories. Yvonne lives in London with her youngest son, who is a temporary resident, and his cat, Nala Bengal. Temporary resident, how long is that?
He's like a boomerang. He's bouncing back.
And Moses at the end, hi, our youngest panelist today, thank you for coming, is 22 and lives in Bristol. His debut literary novel, An Olive Grove in Ends, is a resonant coming-of-age story, which also offers an intimate portrait, at times tender and lyrical, at other bleak and despairing, of a black British community in Bristol. The novel's narrator, Seon, a young man of Jamaican heritage who struggles to escape the world in which he was raised. He is caught between the opposing claims of his lawless but warmly affectionate extended family and a self-righteous Christianity peddled by Pastor Lyle, father of the girl Seon has always loved. After graduating with an English degree in 2019, Moses has been working as a tutor to secondary school pupils and has recently started his next novel. His writing is strongly influenced by his literary heroes, and who include James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. Thank you all for coming. So we're going to start off by quickly kind of talking about what being a debut writer means to all of you, because I think we know the varied backgrounds within our working class community and also varied ages. So if you want to start, Lorraine, like what does being a debut writer, when you got that kind of, when you had that email or that letter to say your book has been picked up, what did it feel like to be a debut writer?
Yeah, well, it was weird because I tried for so long, and so I started writing this book in about 2015, 2016, and I worked on it for a couple of years, and I started sending it out to agents and got loads of rejections, and then I tweaked it a bit more, sent it out to agents, got a few more rejections, and then what really helped me actually was going to festivals. So I in 2019, went to 3 festivals, Winchester Writers Festival, London Book Fair, and because I write romantic comedy, the Romantic Novelist Award, Romantic Novelist Association Conference. And all of those I had like one-on-ones with agents and editors, and that really kind of created a bit of buzz about the book, and I was able to get an agent at the end of that year. And then really quickly she sent it out to publishers.
Did your agent that you ended up with, was one of the ones that you spoke to at
No,
the
it
festival?
wasn't.
Oh, right.
But I just kind of used that to, make my cover letter sound really good. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, 3 agents have already called in the full manuscript. Would you like to read it?
Yeah.
And this agent, who's already quite established, was like, okay, send it in. And
That's the thing that a lot of the time when you're writers or when you're setting out as a writer is learning how to pitch. It's learning all the other things and learning how to kind of pimp your wares kind of thing. So yeah, that's really important, that
Yeah.
learning how to get it across. People talk a lot about gatekeepers, but I think like at our festival we've had all our editors, all our agents that have been here, all working class, and that's really important because they kind of get it a little bit more than somebody who is coming from outside of our community kind of thing. Jessica, how was it for you as a debut writer?
So my kind of route into publishing the book was I did a master's degree in creative writing, which is definitely not the only way to write a book. But I was kind of working in bars, didn't really know what I was doing. My granddad died and left behind like about £4,000 that I put into the MA. And that really gave me a confidence, I think, that prior to that I'd like really struggled within like academia and I didn't really have a vocabulary to articulate that the ways in which I felt wrong were to do with class. I just thought it was something to do with me. So I finished the MA and I was kind of living in London. I was working lots of jobs. I was like working in bars and tutoring and stuff. And I knew that I wanted to write this book. So I went to the west coast of Ireland where my granddad had lived, and he'd left this kind of like sort of like really old, like falling down house. And I had this plan that I would go there and I wouldn't have to work and I could live there for a few months and write. And it sounds very romantic, but the reality was actually like pretty tough. Like I can't drive, it's really remote. Like I was living on like 20 euros a week. But I had like all of this time and space to write, which I'd never had before. And kind of like through writing the book, I was able to articulate, to find a language for all of these feelings of inadequacy that I think were related to class. And then kind of while I was writing it, I had a short story published in an anthology, and an agent contacted me off the back of that.
Oh, wow.
But then so we sort of met and kept in contact, and then I sent out to a few other agents, and I got rejected by all of them, except for this one guy who...
Is he still your agent?
He is my agent.
Oh, that's good. And good for that.
And then, yeah, I guess it was like really overwhelming because I'd never even really had like a professional job before. I hadn't really had like professional relationships. So it was a real sort of whirlwind in that way. And I guess like a validation in that the risks I had taken paid off. But I said in a panel yesterday, I think like to be a writer, you have to take a lot of risks because it's quite precarious in lots of ways. And I think for me, coming from a working class background, that was a positive thing because I wasn't scared of taking risks, and I'd never had any money, so I wasn't scared of not having money, or like there wasn't necessarily like a career path or any expectations set out for me. And even though that comes with barriers, like it's also quite freeing as well, because you're just sort of making it up.
Yeah. I think for a lot of us, I think over the whole weekend actually at the festival, a lot of people have said that it's like if you've got nothing to lose, we just as well kind of, you know, just push on as much as we can, because I also think that's the working class tenacity as well that we've all got, because so many people at this festival have spoken about getting a break, and everyone is like after 20 years, or you know, most people have had. So I think perhaps things are changing, because it's great to see younger writers, you know, like yourself, and you know, just I think hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not just a flash in the pan, and actually editors and agents will continue to support working class literature, because then they're hearing our stories and our authentic voices, because you know there's a plethora of voices, isn't it, within our
I think we also let other people win because we're nice. And
Speak for yourself.
That doesn't go very well with you know, out and out success, does it? Sometimes.
Yeah.
There's a wider success.
Yeah.
I'm happy with. You know.
Yeah, and it's a fear of rejection as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know. So yeah.
Would you say that your creative writing course actually helped?
I think it did for me because I did an English literature degree first at King's in London, and it was like super elite, and I found it really hard, and I felt like shut out from it. So really what I got from the MA was like the teaching just didn't feel elite at all, and it had a really different attitude, and it gave me the self-confidence, I think, and I think it taught me to edit as well. But I really don't think that's the only way to learn how to write. It was more like it made me feel like it was something I could do, I think.
But you were writing before that?
I was writing before that, yeah, but I maybe like wasn't so confident about it, I think.
Chris, would you like to talk a little bit about your roots, your debut? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Something that Jessica just said actually about being at a posh educational organisation. So in the early 90s, I was lucky enough to go to Durham Uni. I'm from Middlesbrough, so it was nearby, but it was a world away, you know. And I got there, and I was absolutely horrified by how suddenly aware of my accent I was, you know. And I've lived in Kent for 20 years. I've lost most of it. But when Jeff Cox is here, he's got the accent I used to have.
Was he?
You know,
Jeff, stand up and say something.
Yeah, so it's intimidating, isn't it? Really intimidating. And I felt cowed. And I remember being 18 and actually changing my accent and hating myself for it and thinking, Jesus, this isn't how it should be.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
I'm not 18 anymore. The Dig Street Festival is it's kind of between genres, you know. It's a literary fiction comedy. So there's a sort of slight Johnny Vegas element to it. It's a bit defensive, and I think that's part of what it is to be a working class writer as well. You know, I'm always sort of poo-pooing it because I'm scared of it, probably, you know. But so I mean, this book, you know, it's a comedy, but it's deeply serious to me, and it does have its serious parts as well. But it's really guided my life, the writing of this. It's so. I remember when 9/11 happened. I was 26, and I remember waking up. I've always been a history buff, and I remember waking up the next day and thinking, right, the 20th century is now over. You know, it's absolutely over. It's never, you know, we're never going back there. We're in the new era now. And it's a slight largesse of myself to link myself to 9/11. But I remember finishing this book in Halifax in a travelodge in 2014. You know, putting the end and thinking, Christ, I've got an actual book. You know, after more than 10 years of trying to write it, trying to learn how to write, you know, and I'm self-taught. I wasn't.
Did you write all the time, or was it you just came back to it and then you kind of left it a little bit, or were you literally writing it for 10 years?
I gave it up in despair many
yeah.
times. I thought, bugger this,
Yeah.
you know, it's just not.
I think we've
working.
all done that. Like, I did that with my debut as well. It was just like sling it, and then
But I always
5
came
minutes
back to
later,
it.
where is it?
Because I have to, because I'm driven to do it. Writing's an obsession, and you're driven to do it. I remember finishing the book and thinking, brilliant, you know, I felt amazing. 40 years old, and the next morning I thought, what do I do now? I don't know anyone. I was a travelling salesman at the time. I was by this canal in Halifax. I thought, I don't know a bloody soul. What can I do?
Yeah,
You know. So then I thought, oh God, if I'm going to get this published, I've got to try and meet people. I've got to try and, you know.
Like Lorraine was saying, you have to put, you know, then you're not a writer anymore, and you've got to get that other hat on.
And I didn't like that.
That business hat or whatever. Yeah, it's hard.
So I went on Twitter and I heard Kit de Waal on the radio, which was great timing because I immediately contacted her and said, look, what you were saying on the Where Are All the Working Class Writers radio program.
Yeah.
I was driving, I was at work, you know, I was in my car and I thought I nearly crashed, you know, because I thought, Christ, that's me, you know. And I contacted her and she was fantastic.
Yeah,
She
Kit's
just
always brilliant
introduced-
getting back to people and
introduced me to loads of
helping in
people.
whatever way. Absolutely, yeah.
And I was on Twitter for a couple of years, meeting lots of different writers, agents, all sorts of people. And in my real life, I still don't know anyone who is a writer or even likes books particularly. You know, it's odd. At work, if I mention books at work, people would just think I was odd. You know. So I'm going on a bit now, aren't I?
No.
But anyway, eventually I met Louise Walters, who is a fantastic person. She really is. She's got some balls, that woman. She just keeps going through all sorts of hardships, and she's got no money, but she publishes books that she takes a risk on books, and they're not mainstream. I mean, this book, Waterstones won't look at this, you know, even though I think it's high quality literary fiction, you know, but they just won't look at it because she hasn't got the contacts or the oomph, you know. Blackwell's have taken it, by the way.
Oh, that's
you know,
good.
That's
That's
nice.
really good.
And
That's
a few,
good to know.
you know, quite a few indies, which is fantastic.
Thank God for indies, yeah.
So I met Louise, and we just hit it off. And she said, you know, what you writing, what you got, and I'd been subbing this out a few years before, and getting rejections where it was so obvious they hadn't read it, or if they had, they'd give me some trite response which showed me that they just didn't get it. It wasn't their world. You know? So meeting Louise was fantastic, and it was a turning point, another turning point in my life when when I got the deal.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah.
Very happy occurrence.
Yvonne, what was your debut experience like? Because you were telling us earlier in the green room that your book is doing really well and it's kind of selling out. So that's a really good story.
Yeah. I've been writing, I think, forever, you know, since I was a child, just, you know, scribbles. But then quite a number of years ago, I decided I wanted to try and write a novel, I think perhaps about 12 years ago. So I wrote something. It was huge, Hilary Mantel proportion. Everything that popped into my head went into it. And I went to my first writer's workshop, Arvin it was, somewhere in a beautiful house I think somewhere in Northumberland. And it was a very weird experience. It was full of sort of proper writers, people who were published, and the odd person like me. And I think it was quite a number of days, 4 or 5 days. It's quite a long thing. But actually, apart from wandering around in very beautiful gardens, I got absolutely nothing from it. When I showed to the person who was running the, and she said, "Oh, lovely writing," but that was basically the extent of the advice. So I came back thinking I've learned absolutely nothing from that. So I thought that's it, no more writer's workshop. So I put this manuscript, I printed it off, at work where you could do things like that, and put it in the filing cabinet and just left it there. And I decided in 2017 that I really wanted to write the novel. And I decided that to do so, I would need to retire from my full-time NHS psychotherapy job. And then I made the mistake of telling everybody that I was going to write a novel. So I retired, so of course I then had to write something. But my background is slightly different in that I've been around sort of literary people for a very long time. I started going to literary festivals when I was quite young. And I remember maybe in the 80s, there was a massive literary festival at the South Bank, and all the Mangellas and the Alice Walkers and the Toni Morrisons and the Paul Marshalls, everybody was there, and it was just incredibly inspiring. And I'd met also a woman named Dr. Margaret Busby. And for anybody who's never heard of Margaret, Margaret Busby is the youngest black publisher, was the youngest black publisher in the country. I think she started her publishing company, Allison and Busby, when she was 19 or 20. And we got talking, and I said to her, I'm trying to write. And we became friends, and every time Margaret saw me, she'd say, "Yvonne, how's the writing going?" I'd be like, "It's not actually going, Margaret." And she'd say, "Don't worry, it will come." And that's all she always said that. So when I gave up my job, in the very week that I was going to retire, I went home, and on my doormat inside my house was a little A5 poster saying that we're advertising a six-session writing workshop literally in the next street. So I thought, well, I'll go along. I hate writer's workshop, but I'll go along. And I went along. And it was in a little teeny bookshop. We'd lost our major bookshop and library, which actually was also in my street. But there was held in a little second-hand bookshop, and the tutor, a guy called Hud Saunders, it was him, myself, and a woman called Mary, and a young man. So there were 3 of us. And I thought, okay. Anyway, Hud turned out to be this amazing teacher and mentor, and I was one of the 3 who went to all 6 workshops. And when we finished, I said to Hud, look, I've got this very unwieldy manuscript at home. Would you like to look at it with me? And he said, well, if all of you come, I will charge you this. The young man didn't, but Mary and I went. And so I took it along to Hud. Hud read it and said, you've got a novel in this, or several novels in this. If you'd like to work with it, so shall we work together? So we began working together on this, and that's how the actual end novel appeared. And so,
how much of that manuscript do you think there's other books from that original manuscript that are still?
I think there's 3 books
really?
in it, yes.
Wow.
So I'm working on a sequel.
Excellent.
So how many words was it?
The old
The original one, yeah.
Oh my God! I mean, have you ever seen Hilary Mantel books?
No, I did not get that reference.
Exactly.
That reference was
She's
still
a British historical writer, and she writes these books that you could hold sort of iron gates back with. They're huge. I don't remember. It's enormous.
Okay.
And actually, what I had very bravely, because writers don't like to show anybody their work because they think everybody's going to tell them it's crap, and it's mostly crap at first. So I'd shown it to a few friends, and all of them said the same thing. Every single one of them said, oh, well, the first few pages are really quite interesting, but the rest reads like a travel manual. So, perhaps you should go back and, do something, kind of, develop those pages, which is actually eventually what I did. And so then I remember, so we worked together for a couple of years, actually, over lockdown. And then it seemed to me that it was finished. I said to Hud, it's finished, I can't think of it, it's done. And then I decided to, which was the hardest part of it, I decided to show it to my daughter, who is the novelist Zadie Smith. That was scary shit, But I showed it to her, and she said, Mummy, that's a really good novel. And I'm like, yes. So then and just a quick little bit of story I'd missed out. I had written, Margaret published a huge anthology called New Daughters of Africa, and she'd published Daughters of Africa 26 years before, and that was a book that was given to me by my daughter when she was about 16 for a birthday present. Anyway, she asked me whether I'd like to write.
Was that Myriad who published that?
Myriad,
yeah.
Same people who published mine.
Yeah.
I write something for daughters, so I wrote, a short bit for Myriad for the book, and so did my daughter. So we both actually end up
Brilliant.
as two of the daughters. And the publishers, Myriad, happened to be at Queen's Park Festival, where Hud had asked me to write a local story and read it at the festival. So I read my local story at the festival. When I came out of the tent, the publisher, director of Myriad came up to me, or it was the publicist, and said, if you ever write anything else, do let us see it. Mm. So when I wrote this, I didn't let them see it. I sent it to an agent who years before had said to me the same thing, but I sent it, and she did that. She literally sent it back the next day. So she said that she was too busy.
Right.
She had just taken on new writers. So I then thought, okay, I'm going to send it to the publishers. Sent it to the publishers and got a note back saying we love this. So
you sent it straight to publishers?
Straight to the publishers.
Myriad,
when was this?
Brilliant, yeah.
This was so I finished it in 2019. 2020 we edited.
I didn't know you could send to publishers unsolicited.
Well, I had no idea you could, but they said, so I sent it.
Fair enough.
Smaller publishers, that's what I mean,
Yeah.
like Myriad are brilliant publishers,
and
because,
they're absolutely incredible publishers.
yeah,
That's it.
Candida Lacey, did
She is fantastic.
I know she has.
She's
I
amazing.
love her. I can't wait to see what she's going to do next, so we can all
she's
jump on
incredible.
board, whatever it's
And
going to be.
She's got a great team, and it's been
Yeah.
so for me, it's been a really amazing journey.
Yeah.
But and I loved writing the book.
Yeah,
I
really
enjoyed it.
interesting. Thank you. Moses.
Yeah, my journey is considerably shorter.
Your 20s.
Yeah. Started writing in 2017 for the first time. Before I'd write like song lyrics, and I'd write bars and such, but not like, I didn't write any prose at all. But I was in uni studying English literature, which I hated. And I was reading, I think it was Cormac McCarthy.
Oh, yes, The
Yeah.
Road.
No, I was reading Child of God.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's my favourite writer, actually.
Your favourite?
Yeah.
I don't like him at all.
Do you know?
No.
Right,
Child
later.
of God is strange, strange book.
That's right.
But I was reading
It
it,
is,
and I thought, oh, I'm better than this.
Yeah,
And it was very, very arrogant,
yeah.
because the next 3 manuscripts I wrote from 2017 to like 2018, 19, they were all sucked. They were all
Right.
rubbish. And when I only realized that once I'd submitted it, and I got feedback from agents, which I did take as like, okay, this is steps, because I'd seen on the internet before where people would just say they just used to get aired when they submit, like no, they wouldn't hear anything back. But so I carried on writing because I started to enjoy it, and and then I wrote an Olive Grove and Ends in 2019. That's my book. It's coming out in April. Shamelessly plugging it. And I wrote that end of 2019, and then I got my agent in the January of the next year, so 2020. Then then got a publisher in the summer.
Yeah, brilliant, yeah.
So it's quick.
Yeah,
In a sense,
mine was actually, I got an agent like that, and I got first book deal,
Yeah, and
two
it
book
just
deals,
starts
really
moving.
quick. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just, but you can still be writing like a long period before, like you're young, but you were writing other stuff, and that's where that's where your authentic voice comes into it, because that's absolutely it. That I always say to people is keep your voice as much as do not, like when I write, I don't read anybody else, because you just want to keep that. You want to keep your voice. So let's hear some of these brilliant stories. Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Yeah, cool.
I'm reading off my phone now because I don't have the book.
Young people reading from their
Modern,
phones. God's sake.
I'm with the times. But yeah, I've got 2 short extracts from the book. This is my face too much. 2 short extracts. The first is from the beginning of the book, and then latterly from the end. I'll talk about it afterwards as well, because they're quite short. But all right. There are roads in neighbourhoods like mine all across the country, broad roads without mansions. In England, they have names like City Road or High Street, except this road was called Stapleton, and those familiar with our charm might call her Stapes. They were broad roads because they tracked their way from one side of Ends to the other. Ends was what we called our neighbourhood, or any neighbourhood like ours. I wasn't sure of the reason, whether it was because it was where the downtrodden saw the light at the end of the tunnel, or because once you arrived, you only left when those in charge wanted to rebrand. Either way, it was stuffed to the gunwales with people trying to make ends meet, so the name made sense. It was a far cry from Clifton. The moment you left the city centre, you could hear or smell ends, whether you took a left out to Staples or carried straight through Old Market. The sounds were disorderly. It smelt non-white. It was the other side of Abbey Road, and the industrial waste bins that were padlocked in other neighbourhoods hung and stank like open stomachs. You could find a million dreams deferred in the torn slips that littered outside the bookies. So that's like the second chapter of the book. And then the last chapter of the book, the protagonist, it's written in first person, so he's talking about the same road. He says, I smiled as we stepped onto Stapes and hoped my nephews would come to love it as much as I did, because there weren't any roads like mine anywhere in the world. Roads whose houses were like lofty mansions with roofs made from the hollow of a single pearl, whose dwellers were like brilliant stars far away in the east or in the west of the horizon. Roads that tracked their way from one side of Ends to the other without a single tree, except that whose trunk was made of gold. The shop fronts were the finest souks, and the north wind blew and scattered fragrances on faces and clothes. Anyone who came went back to their families with their faces shining. The street was a river of clarified honey, and its banks were musk. There was no sun and moon, no day nor night. Passers-by knew morning and evening from the light that shone from the open door of my bakery. Together with Jalen and Jaden, we sailed the pavements in December as the natives we were, accustomed to the breaks in the concrete. So that's the end. And, well, not the end of the book, but the end of the extract. The novel isn't semi-autobiographical, or autobiographical at all, but me and the protagonist live in the same place, we're from the same world, although our beginnings are different. And so I wrote An Olive Grove and Ends as a love letter to my area, which is Eastern, for those of you familiar with Bristol, and if you're not, it's that way. But and it was, growing up, it's a very different place now because there's a lot more white people, it's very gentrified now.
Yeah.
But before, it wasn't like that at all. It was like a bubble of blackness. And I'd step outside of my house, and aside from like my mum, and then white people with dreads, or other black children, or drug addictions, there was no white people. And I'd hear Patois and I'd hear Somali more than English when I went out and played. But and I was saying that this is the environment that Seon's describing and that he comes to love, and his relationship with it, or the destination that he reaches at the end is where I was for most of my childhood, and it's the reason I was able to write this book. And like you said, in terms of like authenticity and keeping your narrative voice.
It's really important, and it's really important. I was reading that you tutor as well.
That's like 2 people.
That's really important that they see you as a positive role model, and you're talking about your upbringing and your background in a way that they can relate to. Because I think a lot of the time we talk about white people or middle-class people writing other people's stories, and it's through a filter, isn't it?
Yeah.
And for you to rewrite your story is absolutely crucial for younger people to read that. And it's the difference between them thinking that they can be writers as well.
Yeah.
Because
That's one thing that I was, I'd never, literally before this panel and before this, I heard about this festival, I'd never considered like the working class to be a community. And I still don't, to be honest. But that's why when I read working class, and in a sense, this is kind of sad, but I read black. You see what I'm saying? Because the majority of black people I know are working class.
Yeah.
Or the majority of black people in this country, that's not an opinion, that's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, the majority of black people in this country are working class.
Yeah.
So that's what I associate it with. And then I know that, and going back to what you said about being working class, or when I'm speaking as a black working class, I recognize the fact that because my journey was so easy because of my predecessors and because of how difficult it was for them, and even the non-writers creating the environment that I'm writing about, it's because of that I was able to have such like a smooth journey. But at the same time, I think it's because as much as I've earned it, I know that without like black platforms and gatekeepers, as much as I've earned it, it was allowed at the same time. And if it wasn't, if Another Growth and Ends, or if what I was writing about wasn't fashionable, then I know that I wouldn't have been published, even if the quality of the work was high, which is.
Yeah.
But
I read that your publicist was saying that you're for readers of Zadie Smith, which is, I think, is brilliant that you're sitting next to
I never
Zadie's
said that.
mum. Yeah.
I never said that, but
What was...
Moses' publicist, and they're kind of the way that they're publicising the book. They've said it's for writers, people who are interested in reading Zadie Smith will be interested in reading Moses'
and
book.
they said Marlon James as well, but I've never read.
Oh, Marlon James. He's incredible.
That's really interesting.
But I read White Teeth.
Okay.
I didn't like it that much. but I read it.
That's fine. I think all of us here, because people who love our books and people like no, thank you.
Moses literally only likes his own work. That's proper behaviour.
And James Baldwin, Maya Angelou.
He's
okay.
James Baldwin is king.
Yeah, different level.
Brilliant.
Marlon James is crazy, amazing writer. You've got to read him.
But I think like they can, once you enter like the stand of like good writing, everything's subjective, but there's like a line of objectivity. So obviously all these writers are good writers, you know what I'm saying? But
But we need your young, fresh,
and don't change.
Voice. Don't change.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Because it's a tough world out there.
Yeah, and it was really important for me to have you here today as well, because that is what it's all about. Cheers. Okay, who's going to read next?
I can, if you want.
Yeah.
Was that a draw in saying who?
No.
Shall I? All right. Okay.
I think it's more fun when whoever feels they're ready to read, then just because when you're in a line and then it's getting closer to you and you're just like, no.
Okay, so the main protagonist in my book works as a cleaner and a trolley collector in a DIY superstore in the East End. So he and his slightly odd friend, Glyn, who's also a mopper, have just got to work. This chapter is called The Fine Art of Mopping. Mopping is art. It is no coincidence that various movie makers have chosen to depict the lonely hero using a mop as a stand-in dance partner. Mopping, if effective, is very much a dance. And like dancing, the effect can be one of style or awkwardness, as well as great emotion. It's also fabulous exercise. On more than one occasion, mopping away, I'd imagine the activity could be popularised into a leisure craze with multiple personal and ecological benefits. But Glyn had pointed out that due to mopping's blue-collar associations, it was unlikely to catch on. Reluctantly, I'd had to agree. Glyn had added that people were very touchy about their roots, particularly those who were apt to purchase lifestyles, engaged as they were in a vicious circle of topping up an empty cup with more emptiness. Like any art, there's more to mopping than one might suppose. Number one, a strong shaft is essential to cope with the forces of wet mop and heavy scrubbing combined. 2, the mop itself must be full and well distributed enough to ensure the metal mount does not scratch the floor. 3, the mop has to be just wet enough to do the job. Too dry and it won't remove dirt. Too wet and it won't dry in time for buffing. This really pissed manager Dave Lofthouse off. 4. The squeezing mechanism within the bucket must be man enough to provide a good strong grip. 5. The right amount of detergent must be added to the water. Too little and it won't clean, too much and a visible residue is left upon the mopped floor. This also angered Lofthouse. 6. One must work backwards so as not to step over what has already been mopped. The path to renew the water has to be left until the very end. 7. It took many hundreds of hours of dedicated practice to become one with the mop. Glyn, in particular, was a Zen mop master. Glyn and I were required to work in harmony, so we both arrive at the entrance of the store at 7:30, the whole place mopped and clean. It's fallacious to imagine that menial jobs don't require brains. They do, as well as grit, determination, and patience. As we mopped, the sun would work its way up the full-height windows at the front of the store, setting the wet aisles aflame. At such times, my mop swinging hypnotically to and fro below me, the world took on a beguiling simplicity. In those instances, I found living extremely bearable. I often wondered whether I could found a mopping retreat. Today, Glyn and I were dead on time, meeting at the front of the store at 7:30 on the dot. Perfectly in sync, Brendan shot past on his sit-on buffer as we were stowing our mops and buckets. "Morning, Brendan!" I shouted after him. No reply. I wondered at what moment Brendan had elected to hold his tongue. I didn't even know what his voice sounded like. It was strange. It was either that he'd said all he had to say, had nothing to say, or had given up trying to say what he had to say. Perhaps it was all of these. Perhaps he'd had a go at picking apart the universe and had, like me, come a cropper. I asked Glyn what he thought about Brendan's silence. Glyn coughed and picked at some gum on the sole of one of his shoes. I asked him why he was also choosing to be silent. He shrugged. Irritated, I reminded him that the story of the world, and the story of humanity in particular, was only half complete, and that consequently there was plenty more to say and do. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. Then I asked him whether he'd enjoyed the magazines of a certain genre last night, and he started to choke. I slapped him very hard on the back. We went into the car park to begin the second part of our morning routine.
That's brilliant, thank you. I think it's really important for us to, recording our lives as well. I always wrote, I left school at 15 and I was always just writing. That was my thing, was writing it. And cleaning jobs was absolutely my life. So that's brilliant, thanks, yeah.
I still love cleaning to this day.
Yeah, I don't, funnily enough.
Like hoovering.
I like mopping.
I enjoy hoovering.
I used to like the buffer. You don't get to buffer. When you're not a cleaner, when you're going to do the buffing, I used to love doing the buffing.
Yeah,
It was that rhythm, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So where should we go next? Paris or should we go to Jamaica?
Oh, what a choice.
I know.
Happy to go
We're going to Jamaica. Brilliant.
Let's go to Jamaica. Okay, so the day I fell off my island is basically about a girl called Erna. She's a protagonist, and she has had to leave her island, Jamaica, at age 14, I think, because her grandmother, her beloved grandmother, has died. So the book, I conceived the idea a long time ago, really. I was working in community and youth work and got talking to a lot of young people there and was hearing their stories, and I began to wonder about what some of their experiences are as I heard their stories, and what the whole thing, this huge transition for many children who are immigrants, but not immigrants who've chosen to be immigrants, have been brought to this country or other countries because they have to join parents who want to try and do the best for them. But sometimes things can go spectacularly wrong. The book, having said that, the book is really, it's about a lot of things. So it is about loss, about separation, it's about immigration, but it's also about, resilience and, surviving and resilience and becoming, one's own unique self, as it were. So it starts off in Jamaica, and some of it is written in patois, so you need to perhaps listen very carefully. My patois pronunciation is not so great anymore. I've lived in this country for 56 years, but if I'm talking to somebody who's talking patois, then I get back into the vernacular quite easily, even though Jamaicans would not say so when I'm there. They'd say, oh, she come from Farin. Okay. So chapter 1. I'm going to read you chapter 1, and then later on I'll read you something else, I think. So you'll begin to get a little bit of sense of Erna's relationship with her grandmother, Melba. I finally learned to ride a bicycle on my 21st birthday. It was an ambition I'd held from the age of 13 when I watched in awe and with a sense of envy as my teenage half-brothers, shirts open, rode their bicycles fast and fearlessly along the chalky roads surrounding my father's village. I admired their freedom and was determined to experience that feeling for myself. The time came when, tired of being just a spectator, I persuaded Errol, one of the more amenable of my half-brothers, to give me a turn. He was quick to hand over his bike. He then watched with a bemused expression as I made several attempts to climb onto the very tall machine. The bicycle was old and temperamental, and my attempts to make it move soon sent me crashing into a clump of stinging nettles. When I looked up, a crowd of village boys had gathered. Most were howling with laughter, except one very tall, black-skinned boy who seemed intent on seeing what I was wearing under my skirt, which had hiked itself way too far above my knees. My shame was complete. Yet now, when I hop effortlessly onto my bicycle, I wonder why it took me so long to learn what turned out to be such a simple skill. Then I remind myself of the saying, nothing happens before its time. My life began on a typically hot day in August 1955 on the Caribbean island of Jamaica, where I was born to one Violet Pearl James. Violet was 13 and a half years old when Miss Melba, mother of 16, grandmother to many more, and the unofficial midwife of the entire district, delivered her own daughter of her first child. In time, she would deliver my mother of a further 3 children, a girl named Patricia and 2 boys, Clifton and Sonny. It was my grandma Melba who told me the story of my birth, although she hadn't been able to recall the exact dates. However, she was certain that I was born on a Sunday, and that my birth was registered some weeks later by her son, Cleveland. My uncle Cleveland was known for his love of the strong white rum produced on the island. Grandma Melba used to say, when him take the rum, it make him behave like a fool man. And according to her, it was because he was drunk that he managed to lose the scrap of paper on which my name had been written, which is how I came to be registered with the name Erna instead of Irma. Cleveland had staggered back to the house and handed Grandma Melba the long strip of off-white paper with its columns completed in black ink in the most stylish of handwriting. I beg you, read out everything it says on the certificate, Grandma urged him. To my grandma, words and paper were just a jumble of confusion. She had never entered a schoolhouse, and as far as she was concerned, she learned everything she needed to learn from the fullness of the good Lord's book, which she would say was a forever learning something. Her Bible learning came from her infrequent visits to the village church, and as soon as I was old enough to read, from me. Otherwise, she felt proud of what she knew. She had learned plenty about the land, how to look after my grandfather and their children and grandchildren, and how to help young women birth their babies safely. And now her daughter had left her to look after her baby while she went to work for a couple that lived in another village many miles away. Grandma Melba nodded along as Cleveland read from the birth certificate. Date of birth, 26th of August, 1955. Is that a Sunday? Yes, Miss Melba, it's a Sunday. Good. We're glad so you get that right, at least, because a Sunday the child born. Cleveland continued. Mother's name, Violet Pearl James. Father's name? Them just put a line through this box, Miss Melba. You didn't tell me a name to give them. If he'd hoped that Grandma Melba would tell him who the father of his sister's child was, her silence left him unenlightened. Place of birth, Rose Hill District. Cleveland had taken his time to get to my name, as Grandma Melba told me. We could tell him forget something, but because of the rum inside him, even though didn't know what him forget. Child's name, Erna Annette Mullings. Erna? Oh, what kind of name that? Now, Irma Annette Mullings, me to tell you so the child name should be. You see how the rum mash up your head, Cleveland? You better pray to God for help you before you're dead. But Grandma knew there was no changing the name. She had registered enough babies to know that once a name was recorded in the great big book, that was it. So Erna, I became.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, really, really good.
So there's lots of stories, and in fact, so many people have said this to me when I've read that first chapter. Lots of stories in Jamaica where children are registered with the wrong name. They sort of try to get to England, and it's all, it's not the name they're using that's on their birth certificate, or the name that's on the birth certificate, and vice versa. And somebody pointed out the other day that happened, and she actually brought a birth certificate to the reading to show me. And back in, I suppose, when Jamaica was, colonized, of course, a lot of the people that they had removed from Africa and taken as slaves, some of those, many of those people would not have been able to read, certainly not in English. So they perhaps went and registered the name, and they just wrote the names the way it sounded, but it wasn't necessarily what the mother had offered. And of course, there was the odd drunk who would go to register the name as well. So it's just playing with that.
Yeah, authentic voices. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you for reading, because that is what is so important, is to keep that and not to water it down just because people might not be able to kind of, understand what it's just, it's just ridiculous. And that's really where...
Well, Patois is a language in its own right.
Exactly.
It's not actually a dialect. It's an absolute language in its own right, based on the Ashanti Tree Ghana alphabet. So we speak phonetically correct.
Did you have to, because you had been away, so did you really have to kind of research, or did you just come back to
lots of research. And when I finished the book, I sent it to Jamaica to Professor Caroline Cooper of the University of the West Indies to check all the patois for me, because they're correct spellings. And if you don't get it spelled correctly, somebody's going to pick you up on it.
Someone's going to say.
So yes, there's lots of research going back to look at the landscape and just kind of look to see how people live for that. Talking to people about their stories of coming here, and
So is your sequel going to be the story, in a few years on?
The sequel has so Erna does go back to her island eventually, and then she comes back, and the sequel sort of picks up as she returns from Jamaica. So the sequel is going to be it's been set in London. So she's grown.
Is it still kind of biographical, semi-biographical?
It's not I will be right now. This is not a biography.
No, I know, but
but it's not autobiographical. But yes, it's going to be. But obviously,
Parts
writers are always writing things that they've heard, they know, they've seen. So in that way, yes. I think it's going to be. It'll be a little bit more political with a small p, because it's now been set from 1976, so there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
You know,
Brilliant.
in the black communities, and well, in all communities, but there's a lot going on that impacts the black community.
Yeah.
At that point, but then it will move. The characters are growing, and so I brought back, when I finished writing the book, when editing the book rather, I really, really missed my characters, and I'm like, what am I going to do now? So I decided to bring back a couple of the characters.
It's brilliant, really exciting. Thank you. Lorraine, should we go to Paris?
Yes.
Brilliant.
So this is my book Uncoupling, which came out with Orion in February, and it came out in the US in August with Penguin Random House. It's a kind of modern love story that begins on a night train, and my main character Hannah, who's from a working class background, has got this boyfriend Cy, who's from a middle class background, and they're off to this kind of poncy wedding in Amsterdam, and they're on this night train, and she's not sure about going to this wedding because it's going to be a bit stuffy, and what's his family going to think of her, and they're making a really big deal about this wedding. And what happens is, later in the book, is that she gets up in the night to change seats because she can't sleep. And the train divides. They hadn't realised the train divided in Geneva, and they end up in different European cities. And so Cy goes to is on his way to Amsterdam, and Hannah finds herself in Paris. And she meets this kind of Parisian guy who is everything Cy isn't. And they have this amazing connection, and he helps her see a side of herself that she hadn't managed to bring out before. And so by the end of the novel, everything with her relationships has changed. So this is from the beginning of the book. She's still on the train. She's on this kind of stuffy night train with Cy. Cy's phone rang, and he fumbled around in his pocket for the handset. Hello? It would be Catherine, I bet. He mouthed, my sister. I knew it. My ears immediately tuned into her shrill voice, reeling off details of the latest minor setback she decided to turn into a catastrophe. After years of dating the good-looking but dull friends of friends from Durham University, that was how she'd billed it to me anyway, she'd met her fiancé Jasper on a work trip to Amsterdam. He was 10 years older than her, an art curator, a job title I still did not fully understand, and from a wealthy Dutch family who apparently owned properties all over the globe. Perhaps for the first time in her life, Catherine felt as insecure as the rest of us. She'd been preparing for her new role with great dexterity, however, and together with her mum Pauline, had pretty much morphed into Berkhamsted equivalent of Pippa and Carol Middleton. They'd thrown themselves into wedding preparations with a frightening intensity, sourcing bespoke invitations from somewhere on Mount Street, and ordering personalised marshmallows for the wedding favours, because that's what Pippa had had, apparently. As for the dress, well, I had not been trusted with the details of the dress. I knew it was from some uber-expensive New Bond Street boutique, but the actual design of it was shrouded in secrecy, and whenever I asked, purely out of politeness, which fabric she'd chosen, or which shade of white, or whether she was wearing a veil, she made a zipping motion across her lips, and I was put firmly in my place. Can't Dad do that? Asked Cy wearily, rolling his eyes at me in attempt at good humour. I smiled encouragingly at him, opening my book to distract myself from the sound of Catherine's voice, which was increasing in volume as the conversation went on, and she got herself in more and more of a state. Seriously, was this what planning a wedding did to you? Magnified every single neurotic trait you'd ever had? No, I'm sure Hannah won't mind putting the napkin rings onto the napkin, said Cy. I whined into my eyes at him, hoping to convey the message that enough was enough, that he had to put his foot down. I'd already been allocated several tasks to ensure the wedding of the year went off perfectly the next day, including compiling the 200-plus place cards. Catherine claimed I was the only person she knew with neat enough handwriting, and tying magenta chiffon around the stems of each bespoke bridesmaid's bouquet. It would have been much easier all round if she hadn't fired the hotel's in-house wedding planner, but when she dared to suggest that Catherine's colour scheme would clash with the dining room decor, there'd been no coming back. Pauline wasn't exactly the voice of reason either. Honestly, the way she and Catherine had been banging on, you'd think the ceremony was going to be televised worldwide.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know you told me a story about the audio. Do you want to tell the kind of when they were trying to find the narrator?
So, I'd never really thought about the audiobook. It wasn't something, but they sort of out of the blue sent me some suggestions for actors who could read, the character of Hannah and narrate the book. And every single one of the suggestions had an RP accent, it was posh basically. So I was like, okay. So I emailed back, and they were very nice, and I emailed back and said, you know, Hannah's actually from a working class background. Do you have any other suggestions? And they were completely baffled, like utterly baffled. I didn't think they understood what I meant. And so they said, can you have a look through Audible and show us what you mean? So I had to troll through lots of audiobooks on Audible, and I couldn't actually find anyone that had a southern working class accent. There were some northern voices. Otherwise, it was posh south. So I found one or two that were kind of somewhere like a happy medium, and sent it to them. Like, oh, thank you so much. And they were so like grateful for this suggestion. That, and it made me feel sad also for actors, because I used to be an actor, and I would, I knew that I would never get a job reading audiobooks, because they just use these samey RP voices.
What's a working class accent? Like when you say that, what do you mean?
Well, I just mean someone that's from the south of the country that's not posh, you know? So it doesn't have to be, she's not a Cockney, she's not she's not from Essex, she's just not posh. And that's not represented anywhere that I could see.
We've had so many different accents kind of in all the different panels, and that's working class accents as well. But you can have, just because you're then working class doesn't mean you have to be really kind of have an accent at the same time, but it's just people just don't understand. Because I know I've spoken to a lot of people that just do audio, and absolutely, they're told to get rid of any kind of accent, so they just do that one, and they might be working class, but they've just become kind of posh. But it's just ridiculous, because we all should be able to celebrate the regions and also the amount of people, from different countries in this country, from different backgrounds, because an accent is the most beautiful thing, and hearing everybody read, that's the joy of words, that's the joy of literature, because we've just been, everything's so filtered and so beige, and that's what this festival is just kind of jigging it about a bit. Yeah. Another lovely accent, please, Jessica.
I think when I went to uni, I bred my accent out of myself, and then I try to bring it back. So sometimes I just hit an awkward in between, and people are like, where
I love that expression, bred it out of you.
It's really sad.
It's horrible, yeah, it really
Whereas
is.
with people who do speak RP, just speak that in all circumstances, don't they?
Yeah.
And
They're like robots, aren't they, a little bit,
that's how I speak. Yeah.
And it changes depending on how you're...
We have to be chameleons.
Yeah. Like if I'm talking to my mum, it's much stronger.
Yeah. Has your mum got a posh telephone voice?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine does.
So I'm going to read an extract from the beginning of Saltwater, which is about a mother-daughter relationship. It kind of uses the framework of a mother-daughter relationship to explore things about place and class and the body. And Lucy, my protagonist, grows up in Sunderland, moves to London to go to university, and when her grandfather dies in Ireland, she retreats to his house on the west coast of Ireland. So it is semi-autobiographical, but a lot of it is fictionalized as well. And this section is, so Lucy and her mother are in Ireland, the grandfather's just died, and there has been some kind of fracture between Lucy and her mother. My mother and I have inherited my grandfather's small stone cottage through the Blue Stack Mountains by the sea. It is tucked into a nook crammed with giant rhubarb and purple hydrangeas. There are wild potatoes and mangy kittens and clumps of shamrock clustered in the corners. The garden is very overgrown, but if I climb onto the kitchen roof, I can see the sea. We arrived to find that colonies of mould and specks of damp thrived in my grandfather's absence. They were splattered across the walls and ceilings like a sludgy Pollock painting. Tiny worms and mites had burrowed holes in the wooden furniture. The drawers and cupboards were crusty with rust, and the fridge stank of sour milk. The mattresses were crawling with bugs. In the months before my grandfather's death, something between my mother and me was fractured. Her presence in my life had been solid and gold, then suddenly she was not there anymore. I felt her pulling away from me. It hurt inside of my body, my intestines stretched and sore. I felt confused by love, the way it could simultaneously trap you and set you free. How it could bring people impossibly close and then push them far away. how people who loved you could leave you when you needed them most. We talked about practical things when she called me in London, when the funeral would be and how I would get there. We listened to the radio during the drive from the airport, and at the wake we chatted to my grandfather's neighbours and friends. It wasn't until he had been buried and everyone had gone home to their brandies that we were alone together in the silent cottage. The distance glinted between us, sharp and dangerous. We sat on a sheet of newspaper on the floor and looked around. "What are we going to do?" I asked her. "Burn it," she said, blowing on a cup of tea. "You what?" "We're going to have to burn everything." "Burn it where?" She paused. "In the garden." "Everything. It's the only way." She gave me a look. I knew she was trying to teach me something, but I didn't know if I wanted to learn it. I knew she wanted me to let go of things that did not belong to me, but I could not work out which things were mine. I did not know how much of my story I was entitled to take and how much of the past I was allowed to leave behind. We lit a bonfire and it burned for 3 days. We fed it everything: the mattresses, the bed frames, the chairs, the rugs, the chest of drawers, the dishcloths, the wardrobe. Scraps of paper scribbled with his handwriting, pink betting slips, old photographs, boxes of tablets and thick-rimmed glasses, his spare set of teeth. I reread musty letters I had sent him and found forgotten Christmas cards lodged between radiators and walls. We shuddered as the duvet went up in a flash and took hammers to the dining room table. We emptied bin liners filled with socks and underpants into the flames. I liked watching the sofa best. The upholstery burned in jagged shapes, leaving the wooden skeleton standing on its own for a moment, naked and shy. Plasticky smoke gathered in the trees. "Are we allowed to do this?" I asked my mother. "Probably not," she replied. "Feels good though, doesn't it?" She squeezed my hand. Our faces were hot from the flames. We cleaned the house as the fire raised the garden, clearing the cupboards and scrubbing the sinks. We sang along to the Shangri-Las and the Ronettes, bleaching the kitchen counters until they were bright white and dazzling. I covered my mouth with a scarf, trying not to breathe in black smoke. I didn't want tiny pieces of my granddad's clothes and furniture to settle in the back of my throat. "Let's get some taties on this fire, eh, Lou?" she joked, stoking the embers with my grandfather's walking stick. I looked at her. She had mud streaked across her forehead. I felt the sharpness between us soften a little, as though the edges had been rubbed smooth. She laughed. "Don't look at me like that. It's only stuff, you know." The debris of my grandfather's life landed on our clothes and in our hair. It coated our skin. I learned that the drifting bits of ash are called fire angels. After a house fire, they are considered to be very dangerous because they can reignite the blaze. They are small and fragile, but they are still smouldering.
That's lovely, thank you. It's brilliant. Can we have a round of applause for everybody? Brilliant reading, thank you. I think what I've taken away from today is this morning is debut writing, but what an incredible mix of very different books, very different writers, and that's really positive for fiction and working class fiction going forward. Anyone got any questions for these guys? The microphone's coming. We've locked the doors. They've just locked. Okay. Lady at the back. I think her name might be Jenny.
Hi. All of this reminds me of something that I remember going to see Kerry Hudson talk about Lowbourne. And her thing then was, if you can't see it, how can you be it? So listening to all of you talking in your various experiences, do you feel that that's changing? Do you feel that with what you're producing across a range of black writing, working class writing, all different, even down to asking, can you have a working class voice? Do you feel that that what you're producing is working towards a landscape that is changing to be, if you can, to encourage other people that they can be it because they're seeing it with you guys?
No. I think we're in fashion and we're in trend at the moment, and I think that trends change. And in however, I don't believe like in like some sort of like progress. I think things just go in circles. I don't know if anyone disagrees.
Well, I've had loads of really lovely messages from readers, and I guess that's the only way that I can gauge it, just saying that they really connect with the character of Hannah, that they've had some of the same struggles, and they, you know, they're in, you know, that feeling of wanting to change your life but not knowing how and not having the tools to change it. And so, I mean, looking at that, I'm hoping that it is kind of, you know, filtering through into the readership, and they're seeing something different about this kind of work.
I feel a bit less optimistic in a way. I think that social mobility in Britain has completely backtracked. You know, I really do. I just see a increasingly right-wing doubling down in terms of you know, people with the wealth and power protecting their assets, essentially. I think that we live in a... I mean, when my kids are teenagers and the opportunities they had in school were so much more limited than the opportunities I had when I was in school in the 80s, you know. Then we talked about non-Govian things, I might say, you know, philosophy or art, you know, there were voices. I had music lessons. I learned to play the violin free of charge throughout my whole childhood and profited massively from that, you know. But my kids didn't have that opportunity at all. You know, it just wasn't there, and I couldn't believe what a poor state we were making. Sorry to be a bit depressing.
No, it's true. It's great to hear Moses saying that from, you know, the perspective of a 22-year-old, because he's keeping his eye on it, you know, and it's really easy because the publishers can quite easily do you over. They you know, you've got it down because they do like to use you for that, for their own agenda. Yeah. And use them. That's the thing, and that's the whole thing with this festival, is use them back. Like, and if you're not happy with something, you're just like, I'm moving on. I'm getting a new agent, or I'm getting a new editor, whatever it is. And just be aware of that, because publishing is very nice and it's very shiny and it's all like, you've really got, and it's great to hear that you've got your eye on it. Yeah. Anybody else? Any more questions? Yeah.
I was going to say before the question, I think I want to believe things are changing, but I also completely understand what you've just said. I think that the last 2 years have indeed been extremely strange, and I think there is that doubling down. And you know, I live in London, and you know, you talked about your ends, where you've come from, and to watch the changes, to be seeing the changes in London. I used to take my children to a park called Queen's Park. There was quite a lot of parks around me where they played, and it was a very mixed community. Now, all of these parks are just, it's gone. The gentrification of everywhere is, and I don't know what they're doing with all the other people. I don't know where all the black people have gone. You know, I mean, there was a place called Kensal Rise, which was like a ghetto. Kensal Green, now Kensal, you know, even the toilet is a restaurant. You know, and I don't know what they, you know, so there's something. So it seems that, you know, that you kind of, there's a step forward and there's several step backwards. And it seems like the rich and the powerful are determined to hold on to their enormous wealth. They, you know, and
pay no taxes.
Yeah, and they're coming up with, and they want to tax the little person over and over again. So I want to think it's changed. I mean, but I also agree with you, Moses. It feels very on trend. I mean, I think, I end up in things like Tatler. I've never even heard of Tatler. You know, I'm like, what's Tatler? You know, and you know, and all, and I'm kind of, you know, my book has been sold, but I'd like to think that, you know, we're selling our books because we've written pretty good books and people want to read them, and certainly my readership is from my 11-year-old granddaughter, she have read it, right to 97-year-olds and across the ethnic, racial, gender divide. Everybody, there are all kinds of people reading this book and turning up for literary festivals and stuff. So let's hope that there's some positivism, going on as well.
A key reason I like being published by my publisher, Louise Walters, is that foremost she loves the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
She's
smaller
not-
press is
She's not actually
definitely-
asked about the business side of things.
Yeah.
She needs to be,
Yeah.
but she's not. She's about books, and that's the publisher I wanted to be with.
Yeah.
I can't do phony stuff. I
Yeah.
just can't.
Yeah.
I think also like it is a fickle industry, and like people might listen to you more when something's in trend. But I also think like you just have to take everything you can get, and kind of like the writing always has to be for you, really. And if you've kind of done that, and if one person reads your book and feels like it connected with them, then it's like maybe it's worth it, aside from like the publishing cycle, I think.
Yeah, that's more important, isn't it? Because otherwise, down the line, you feel like you might have sold your soul to the devil.
Yeah.
The devil being, huge. I mean, I'm published by a huge publisher, but like, you've just got to keep your eye on it, just in case, and be true to yourself all the time.
Yeah, or like what will allow you to do your work, I think, is the question you need to ask, rather than like getting caught up in the...
And not be afraid to disagree.
Yeah.
Because later on, you'll be like, well, why did you do that change? Or why did you ask me to, change certain things? Be true to yourself. Because they appreciate that. They will, down the line. Yeah.
Yeah, and you do have to fight your corner a bit, I think.
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. Final question there?
Good morning. Sorry, English is not my first language. It's the first time I'm here in Bristol. It's a lovely city. It's a shame the weather is not helping. But I just heard about this event on Friday with your interview, Natasha, on the BBC Radio 4.
Oh,
And,
Radio 4. I was on
Radio-
West Country as well. I don't know which is better, West
Yeah,
Country TV or Front Row.
Yeah. My question, I have to ask you this question, sorry, otherwise I'll be kicking myself if I don't. So obviously you write in a genre that you most enjoy, you feel more comfortable writing, but what's your experience on the daunting task of finding an agent, to represent you? Because I think this is what stops a lot of writers from progressing forward. So a lot of writers have material written, but then they don't know how to go about, finding an agent, or what you do. What's your experience on that? Thank you.
I've submitted a lot over the years to agents in sort of bursts, really, because I end up thinking, I can't be bothered with this. And I've got so many responses. I've written a few books, by the way. I've got so many responses where they say, we really loved your book and you really can write. I'm sort of quoting verbatim there, But it wasn't quite the right fit, and lots of variations on that, And I just can't help thinking that it's not the right fit because my face doesn't fit, essentially. Or my background doesn't fit, and it's a bit depressing, that,
Yeah.
It is a bit depressing.
A lot of editors, and it's probably agents are a lot easier because they're predominantly lovely people. Editors are lovely too, but they've also got their eye on, everything else. And editors often say, it doesn't speak to me. And you look at the agent and they're white, or the editor and they're white and the middle class, and it's like, of course it doesn't fucking speak to you, because you're not that person. So our problem in publishing is that there's not enough editors and there's not enough people making the decisions where it matters. Do you know what I mean? It's so then when they say it doesn't speak to you, when it's like, well, it's not going to speak to you because you've not got shared experience. You don't recognize that authentic voice. So I think in publishing, one thing we really need to do is get more editors into those positions who are then, they are the gatekeepers, and then they are the ones who can then see these incredible writers, these stories coming through.
I think
Douglas.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say Douglas Stewart, the author of Shaggy Bairn. I think he sent his book to 30 publishers who all turned him down. And of course, last year he won the Man Booker and everything else after that, and the rest is history. And if anybody's read the book, it is a phenomenal book. It is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, how any editor could have turned it down, any agent could have turned it down is beyond me.
And they're all kicking themselves now, because then they
They're
realise,
kicking
right? Yeah.
themselves, and it's because I can only think it literally is because he is a proper working class, as a Glaswegian writer, a proper working class lad. But his book is just crazy fantastic, so there'll be a lot of agents.
And if anyone
publishers.
missed it, he kicked off our festival. He was kind of live from New York,
Yeah.
so he kicked off our Working Class Festival, which is on Thursday, but it is on, so it's online, so you can check back on
So
that.
you just got to get determined, I think, as well.
I think, like, on a practical level of finding an agent, where I went wrong when I sent out to lots of people and got rejected, is that you really have to do your research and send your book to people whose interests are, like, very much aligned with yours. And if you look at writers that you admire and feel that your work fits with, if you look to see who they're represented by, and then in your cover letter you can say, like, oh, I saw you represent, like, I don't know, Kerry Hudson, for example, and I feel my work fits with them. I think that's something I didn't realise. I just went on recommendations from people, and probably I was sending my work to people who, like, it really wasn't a good fit. So I think that's something
Yeah, it's
that's
really good
important.
advice, yeah, because otherwise it's really demoralising. But
Yeah.
you're literally just talking to people who just don't get it.
Yeah.
And you know, if you can see writers, you know, with your question with agents, if you can see they're representing a couple of working class writers or people who, you know, the themes and issues that you might be writing about, then that's then they should be on your top list. Yeah.
And I think really show them that you know, following on what you said, Jess, like what your book is, like what you want it to be, who you are as a person. Just go in there with real kind of as much confidence as you can muster. Put it all in your cover letter. This is what I can do. This is what I want to write about. And just show them who you are. And I think, you know, then you'll kind of stand out at least. You'll get them to read it. And just keep going.
That's brilliant, yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. These guys are going to sign their books. We're going to go through the doors, and then we've got a little bookshop there. So if you want to chat to them, because I know sometimes you've got questions that you might not want to ask in front of everybody else, but then, yeah, they're all going to stick around for 10, 15 minutes and sign books. Okay. Thanks for coming. Brilliant.